Hello, I'm Abdul-Hakim, and you're watching Indiana Issues coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Thank you all very much for being with us today. We've got a lot of things to get to. The president delivers his State of the State address. Indiana lawmakers continue to move along towards some major deadlines. And, of course, it could be a possibly an abortion battle brewing in the legislature as well. And joining us on our roundtable panel today on Indiana Issues is our good friend, political commentator Lindsay Marie. Lindsay, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Political writer for WIBC and Network Indiana, Eric Berman. Mr. Berman, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here as always. Thanks.
And political strategist and consultant Jennifer Hallowell. Jen, thanks for being with us today. Welcome to the Indiana Issues family.
Yeah, thank you. First time.
Just so you know, Jen's husband Kyle Walker occasionally sits in, so you're much better in that chair than he is. That's just
I
what
don't
I
know
tell you.
about
So let's go ahead and get started, my friends. The State of the Union. The president delivered his second State of the Union address this past week, and it sort of seemed like mixed messages. On the one hand, calling for cooperation, but also some elements of confrontation, cooperation on things like infrastructure, dealing with the opioid crisis, but also a bit sort of confrontational on the issues of immigration, also the abortion issue. Eric, let me start with you. The president's message, how well do you think it played?
I don't know if you even know if that's the right question. I'm not sure that a State of the Union playing really is an issue. The Democrats are going to hate it if it's a Republican incumbent. The Republicans are going to applaud enthusiastically for a Republican incumbent. When it was President Obama instead of President Trump, you could flip the parties in the same thing. I think, and several people have pointed this out, although it seemed to take about 24 hours, it's less useful as a blueprint for the next year and this ensuing Congress, less useful for that than it is as a blueprint for the 2020 campaign. That line late in the speech about we will never become a socialist country, that is putting down a marker for the 2020 campaign.
Lindsay, what do you think? Was this about 2020 as opposed to 2019?
A little bit. I think he's already looking ahead at 2020 and he's speaking to his base. But actually, I was surprised that he reined it in as much as he did. I figured he might go a little bit off the rails. So I was very surprised that he stuck to the teleprompter. He's stuck on messaging for the most part. And I think there are some Dems who watched that and probably weren't as angry as they could have been.
Jen, let me get you. Like I said, you dealt with Republicans before. Was this, and also state of the state type addresses, was this a speech about 2019 or about, hey, I'm just laying the groundwork for 2020?
I think it was both. I do think that it was a really good speech. It was long, but I think it was a really good speech and frankly more more positive than I expected. I mean, I thought that he might be fighting a little bit more. I mean, obviously he had the lines for immigration and other things that are hot button issues with Democrats, but he also threw out plenty of things that everyone should support. And frankly, I thought the part where he acknowledged all of the new women in Congress was a very kind thing. I mean, he threw out a couple of different olive branches. I think that those members did not do themselves any favors by the way they reacted. I think they ended up looking bad. And anyway, so no, I do think he set out kind of the marker for this immigration debate, which is continuing. And I think that overall Republicans were super pleased with his speech, and it probably didn't change anything for anyone else. But I think an objective, maybe more independent voter watching it, I think came away with a positive feeling about it.
And it's interesting because in addition to the political backdrop, we're also sort of in the middle of that break in the government shutdown. And I was kind of wondering how you thought that sort of factored into the address the president gave.
I'm not sure it's a factor. Obviously, we've got another deadline coming up. People sound more enthusiastic. Like Jennifer, I was a little bit surprised that he didn't go harder on pursuing the wall. That was kind of toned down. Just to synthesize the women to my left and my right, I think that this was different from a typical Trump address in that he clearly took this seriously. This had the tone of a State of the Union address. There was not a lot of red meat. There was not a lot of confrontation. There were a couple of moments, but this was a very conventional State of the Union.
And I think, Lindsay, something I thought was interesting, too. The president, for the most part, stuck with the script.
Yeah. There was a few times where he started to riff a little bit, and that's when the personality and sometimes the charm can come out a little bit. And so when he was talking to the women that were sitting down, and was like, you're going to want to keep standing for this, or he's like, I'm talking about you, and he would make little off comments that definitely were on the teleprompter. I think it did show a little bit of his personality came out a little bit. And I think for those Democrats that were sitting down, they've not yet mastered the art of you can hear something you disagree with, but still seem pleasant and not agitated.
And I think sometimes a lot of people will forget when we have these State of the Union addresses, and when they always assume the camera is on you, because you never know what kind of reaction shot you're going to get, because Kamala Harris, the Democratic senator from California, who's also run for president, she did not look happy at all. And I have seen that look before. It is called my wife. And that is when you immediately leave the room and stop talking. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, a couple of those Democrats, I mean, they do it. They plan. They want to be caught in that moment looking angry or shaking their head or whatever. And then you see some of them sending that out on Twitter afterward to try to raise money off of it. I mean, I think it's old.
I don't think they do themselves any favors by doing that, because the average voter who's not, in our little bubble looks at that, and if they don't follow it too closely, they just look unapproachable and unlikable. So there is an art to, you can hear something you disagree with without looking extremely angry, and they need to work on that if they're going to get much further with their votes.
Eric, let me ask you this before we jump to our next topic. Is it kind of a little bit of a different State of the Union when we get to this point? Because you're the president of the United States, you're sort of staring out of the Congress, and by the way, several of those people in that audience want your job.
Yeah, that's a good point. And they're going to have the cameras on them, either that, or if you're a young freshman congresswoman with a cool acronym for your name. I mean, that's where the camera's going to be. That's the nature of the beast. Put me on Team Mitch Daniels. I'd love to see them just go back to a written address instead of this. It has become too much spectacle and too much can we either sit stone-faced or applaud wildly for absolutely anything? Never going to happen, but I'd like to second the president of Purdue.
You're watching Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guests today are political commentator Lindsay Marie, Eric Berman, WIBC Network Indiana, and political consultant Jen Hallowell. Our friends this week at the Statehouse file reported this week that the Indiana Election Commission said House Speaker Brian Bosma did not violate state laws by using campaign funds to investigate a former intern who alleged they had a sexual encounter back in the 1990s. Democrats, the decision was unanimous, even though bipartisan Democrats and Republicans. Some Democrats crying foul, saying this should have been more open to the public. Lindsay, let me start with you. What does this mean, do you think, for the Speaker?
Honestly, I think people already have made up their minds whether or not it was moral or ethical or not. So outside of our little bubble, I think most people aren't going to care about what the ruling is. They're just going to go with what they already agree with. But to be honest, these were campaign dollars that were given voluntarily by private citizens. So what they do with that campaign money is different than what they do with taxpayers' dollars. So I don't really have an issue with the ruling at this point at all.
Let me get your thoughts on this, Jen, because you're someone who's actually run campaigns before. And, donors, they give money. I guess the question is, what's a campaign use and what is it? I mean, usually people think it's to buy yard signs and send out mailers, but it's also, to do research, and I would think to be ready to respond to whatever allegations might be out there.
Yeah, so I've been helping file campaign finance reports for more than 20 years. And through that process, have read all the different rules and stipulations for campaign funds. And so I was able to, in 1 second, respond immediately when Democrats raised this challenge that it absolutely is permissible to use campaign funds. And so all this is drama for no reason. I don't think anyone cares. I think the only person who may have really ever cared is the person who was running against the speaker in this last election. But I don't frankly think that anyone else cares, and it's not a big deal.
Eric, does it matter that A, it was a unanimous decision, B, bipartisan, and one of the people who was actually on that panel was Suzanne Overholt. She used to work for Bart Peterson and also used to work for Planned Parenthood. I mean, when you got sort of those things on the Democrat side and saying, hey, unanimously, you know what? There's no wrongdoing.
Well, Suzanne Overholt, as I understand it, recused from the vote. Mike Claytor, who ran for state auditor for the Democrats a couple of elections back, stood in for the vote. But that said, yeah, I mean, the fact that it's bipartisan and unanimous, that's important. If this had a partisan tint to it, if it had been a 2-2 deadlock, which has been known to happen on the Election Commission, that would have been a problem. There's two committees that are deliberately balanced evenly as opposed to a majority party. You've got the Election Commission, which has just done its thing, and you've got the ethics committees in the House and Senate. The House Ethics Committee, of course, still looking at this. They're looking at the same issues. I'd be surprised if they reach a different conclusion, but they are balanced equally. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats in the case of the ethics committees, 2 and 2 for the Election Commission. It makes a difference. It gives it some weight.
We got a response from the Speaker's attorney. If we get that thrown up on the big screen there, Thomas. The Speaker's attorney, Margaret Christensen, Bringen, Greenbaum, and Dahl, said the following, saying, "We are pleased with the bipartisan and unanimous decision made by the Indiana Election Commission during its recent public meeting to dismiss the complaint, which was purely political motivated." Said, "Moving forward, the Speaker will continue to fully cooperate with the House Ethics Committee and is confident the committee members will do their due diligence and come to a conclusion." One of the things that has been questioned about the House Ethics Committee is that a number of Republicans came out in support of the Speaker, signing a letter saying we believe the Speaker, et cetera. How do Republicans navigate that water in particular?
Well, I mean, I guess, again, I don't really think it matters. In hindsight, perhaps they shouldn't have all signed that so that someone could have come out and not already had a predetermined opinion on the matter. But frankly, they, I believe, knew everything then that they know now. And so they reached that conclusion before an official meeting occurred. And that probably doesn't matter either.
Are we in a different place because of the Me Too movement in situations like this?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's why this came up in the first place, because everything is being looked at in a new light. As everyone has said, it is no less true for being a cliche. These are rumors that had swirled for years. I mean, this supposedly happened before I was ever at the Statehouse, and I had heard about it, but it was just that it was a rumor. Rumors have gotten a second look in the Me Too era. It was what made it go public, ironically enough, is in fact that the use of campaign funds, the fact that there was an actual action taken and funded through campaign donations. That's what brought it into the Star.
We'll be taking a quick break here in just a second here. Lindsay, I want to get your thoughts on this. One of the things that is whenever these issues sort of resurface and pop up, there's always this comparison between how the Speaker of the House is being treated by his fellow Republicans and, of course, the Attorney General, Curtis Hill. Does this sort of reinforce that sort of awkward relationship that Republicans have amongst themselves?
A little bit, but I also think the situations are completely different. I mean, it's comparing apples to oranges. The accusations against Curtis Hill and what happened is completely different. You're also talking about, like I said, campaign donations, which are voluntary by private citizens, versus I think there were some issues maybe with Curtis Hill potentially using taxpayer dollars to fund either his legal defense or investigations, and there was questions about that. So I just think they're 2 completely different situations, and you can't really compare them.
Apples and oranges, Jen?
Absolutely. I totally agree. The timing also is very different, and I don't think that the Attorney General has been treated unfairly considering the circumstance and the situation and the timing. And so these things are approached differently for good reason.
You're watching Indiana Issues, coming to you live from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Annapolis. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. We come back. Is there an abortion battle brewing at the Statehouse? We'll check on that. And also issues of gambling and alcohol, all the vice things, stuff that we love and hold dear. Lawmakers are dealing with as well. You're watching Indiana Issues. We'll be right back. Any issues? I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, coming to you live from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today on our panel are political commentator Lindsay Marie, Eric Berman, 93 WIBC Radio Network Indiana, and political consultant Jennifer Hallowell. Indiana Republicans getting a rare legal victory, or rather looking for a rare legal victory this past week in their efforts to restrict abortion, outlaw second trimester procedure, hoping a more conservative U.S. Supreme Court may rule in their favor. The Attorney General filed a petition to determine whether a court's law required an ultrasound at least 18 hours before an abortion procedure takes place constitutional. We just also had the Supreme Court, just in the past 24 hours as we tape this program, uphold a stay on a Louisiana abortion case. Jennifer, let me jump with you here. Do you think this will make it to the Supreme Court? And based on what we've seen so far, are we really going to expect a change, even though it looks like the court has changed? Maybe there aren't enough changes on the court yet to maybe start doing something different with the abortion issue.
I would be surprised if it makes it there. You know, we don't have the best track record on some of these issues. I think we've lost in the courts on 6 or 7 different matters over the last several years, and that is, by the way, why Republican leadership in the House and Senate has refused to hear some bills that a handful of folks continue to try to bring forward. We already know that they're going to be unconstitutional, so we're not going to spend time debating them in the General Assembly. And but you know, I'm not surprised that the Attorney General is making this move, but I don't know what the likelihood is.
Lindsay, should the Republicans sort of this isn't going to change, continue the strategy of pass this type of legislation, or maybe adopt a different strategy?
I would adopt a different strategy. I think if they get lucky and it does go to the Supreme Court, they're going to lose. You look at the undue burden test, and I think there's a very valid argument to be made that financially that will not pass that test. Also, there's the right to refuse medical treatment under the Supreme Court. They've just got declared. It is under that, was it Cruzen, that you have the right to refuse medical treatment. An ultrasound before an abortion is most likely not always medically necessary. So if you're forced to do that, they're also violating that constitutional right as well.
Eric, what does this do for the abortion issue, do you think?
Probably moves it to, I was tempted to say moves it to the back burner, except we've passed a bill pretty much every year the last 3 or 4, and they all get struck down. This is the first one where we've gone all the way to the Supreme Court, I believe, attempting to get a hearing there. We may see another one of those nibbling around the edges bills. The Curtin-Isley bill is not going to see the light of day, but there might be a couple of these other restrictions on the fringes, and the likelihood is that it's going to be in that same ballpark. There's been an unbroken record here. Brian Bosma said a few weeks ago in his weekly media availability, he was asked about this. He said, I think they're one vote away on the Supreme Court, that it's not in a position where the court would overturn it. I think the Louisiana case coming down on Thursday suggests that he's read that one right.
And I think it's interesting, too, because it seems, and I think the Speaker makes a really good point when he says, we're not going to go try to buy a lawsuit. And something like the Curtin-Isley Life Begins at Conception bill, I mean, that is a lawsuit just waiting to happen, as opposed to take a sort of more methodical approach, regardless of what you think about the issue and where you are, and sort of maybe tinker around the edges a little bit, because I remind people, you may think you know the justice on the Supreme Court, but you really don't, because you have no idea where people are going to come down on this stuff. So why buy a fight when it's not necessary?
Yeah, and again, we've bought a bunch of lawsuits the last few years, but there were plausible arguments to be made saying, well, this is not an undue burden. The courts disagreed, but there was at least an argument to be made. There's no question that passing the Life Begins at Conception bill would get thrown out unless they are going to overrule Roe versus Wade.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guests today are political commentator Lindsay Marie, Eric Berman, 93 WIBC Network Indiana, and Jennifer Hallowell, political consultant. Another big news item this week in the world of vice, so to speak. Senate panel approving some of the most sweeping gaming changes that Indiana has seen in 25 years. Also allowing for sports betting, moving of casino. And at the same time, lawmakers start looking at Indiana's rather Byzantine alcohol laws, which I argue is an insult to Byzantines everywhere, allowing more permits for municipalities, reducing the time that licenses can sit in escrow, and something I had to go back and get some clarification on. Eric, I think you were with me this week at the legislature, sort of reintroducing segregation in grocery stores as to where the alcohol can sort of be Lindsay. You give me that look, but it was actually in there.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
So, Mr. Berman, we'll start with you. Gambling alcohol. What do you think?
The casino debate is going to be the debate of the session. We always sort of ask before the session starts, what's going to be the defining issue? One year it ended up being RFRA, which nobody saw coming. There have been last year it was road funding. There's always something. It's looking like the casino bill, if not teacher pay, then the casino bill is going to be the defining one because it's so huge. It affects Terre Haute. It affects all the existing casinos. It affects the city of Gary in ways related and unrelated to gambling. It's just got a massive impact, and there's a lot of moving parts to it.
One of the things, Jennifer, when we talk about casinos, and I always say so. The gaming folks would tell you it's a very balanced ecosystem. That if you move one casino 5 feet, you just killed the monarch butterfly and started a hurricane, in the Sahara Desert. You grew up in the Anderson-Pendleton area where there is a casino. But when you talk to folks about gaming, do people worry that if a casino gets moved somewhere, that it'll impact Anderson, or is it just sort of the talk that we hear under the bubble?
Well, I'm not. If you talk about that one specifically, I think a lot of it has to do with the radius and how close you are to other places. And right now, there are folks in Indianapolis who may drive to Anderson, may drive to other places. And I think all of that has been factored into this discussion, and some modifications made to make folks happy, and everyone has kind of their fair share that they have to pay into a variety of different things. But I think I don't know if this will be the defining issue. I mean, it certainly is the issue that has the most lobbyists standing around the committee. But I don't know if for, the average Hoosier that this is a defining issue or one that they're going to pay the most attention to or care the most about. It is very comprehensive. It is interesting. I think that it probably makes sense after how long these original licenses and locations were set up. It makes sense to readjust, reevaluate where things are and the impact. And there's probably a lot of benefit to the western part of the state to have this move and some benefit in Lake County. So I think those pieces look very positive in terms of the forecast through the session. The sports betting piece has people a little bit with more mixed reaction, and part of it is because what data they can use. It has to be coming from the actual leagues, which many people don't want. And I think that may be kind of a hairier debate than the locations.
And let me I want to get to that in just a second. But Lindsay, you spent a lot of time down in the Evansville area. Is there anywhere you're concerned that a riverboat or casino in Terre Haute is going to hurt Evansville or the folks down in French Lick in the southwestern corner of the state?
I would think a lot of the tourism in Evansville actually comes from the south, and Kentucky or Tennessee or different areas. A lot of people would drive up north to Evansville versus drive down from Indy or somewhere. I think the issue with this is that government's picking winners and losers. I don't like the idea that government comes in. It's not the role of government to protect a city from competition or from a business from competition from somebody else. We start doing that, it's not fair all across the board.
But I thought one thing was interesting, Eric. I think you may have saw it too in that debate. One of the first amendments they passed was to make sure, that I think Evansville was not hurt by any loss in gaming revenue.
There was an amendment that was they added or they tried with was it $6 million that they would receive.
Hold harmless.
They didn't just try. That's in there.
Well, I've heard it's gonna. It won't probably get passed with that. But
that's what I said when I saw the vote was unanimous. It's like, well, everybody must have got just enough of something to not do the censure. But let's talk about the whole issue of sports betting and the fact that, like Jennifer said, the big issue may be sort of this monopolies being created with the data, that's being used in sports betting. Eric, I think you and I had a conversation at the radio station one day that it's one thing if you're just talking about a Steelers-Packers victory, what's the point spread? Versus how many yards does this person get and how much do this people rush for, how many field goals does this person get? And so that's where the data starts to get a little tricky.
Yeah, it's the prop bets that are going to make a difference. And also in some specific sports. The Speedway was there. IndyCar was there to testify in favor of the bill. They think this is going to be a big boost to fan interest. Well, we've all seen our share of 500s. You know who won. How do you determine who finished, say, seventh? If you want to place a bet on that, when you've got thousandths of a second separating the guys who are back in the pack, you need the official data, so goes the argument, to be able to settle that bet so that everyone agrees this was a winner, this was a loser. That is going to be much more so than should we have sports betting. Jennifer's exactly right. That's going to be the big argument because there's a lot of companies that are not casinos. There are data companies that have a potential stake in this.
And do we run the risk, as we got a few minutes left here on the program, of data can be manipulated? It's
What?
I know.
Shocked to find
gambling going on here too. Yeah, definitely shocked to find gambling going on here. I mean, how do you maintain?
Next, you'll tell me that some polls are like meant to give a certain result.
Well, I know. I mean, I'm just, and people show up in blackface, in some places in Virginia. I mean, but is that a worry that we have to be concerned about? The quote unquote integrity. The game, because data, rightly or wrongly. I mean, somebody could just make a mistake and input the wrong number. No malfeasance. They just got the data wrong.
I don't know. Ask Pete Rose if it could make a difference. I mean, seriously, the leagues opposed this for as long as they did because they know the intent. That people have to be able to know that the game that they're watching is an honest competition. The NCAA, in particular, has had its share of scandals. You've had point-shaving scandals that have turned at least one championship, that have affected several universities. This is their kryptonite. Baseball, it's been a century, and they're still not over their World Series fixing scandal. This is something every sports league worries about, and the question becomes, what are appropriate precautions to take? And that's where the legislators are going to have to craft something.
Is this going to be one of those situations where Indiana talks on the one hand, we have a problem with expanding gaming, but on the other hand, we do it anyway?
Well, I mean, that's where this debate is headed eventually. I mean, the unanimous vote, I mean, granting that some of that is the money going to Evansville, but if it had been 9-1, that would still be a sign that the Senate's cool with this, or at least a substantial portion of it. Brian Bosma, in those weekly avails we keep talking about, has been notably less enthusiastic about it. There may not be the same enthusiasm in the House. Plus, that's where you get into the wagering tax issues. We'll see what happens. But that phrase expansion of gambling, which used to be just the go-to among the opposition, we don't want to expand it, that seems to be definitely fading in the Senate. The House may still be an active issue.
We're done our last topic. Just a couple minutes left on the program today, our political predictions and prognostications, where we go around the table, ask our panel what they're paying attention to, what they're keeping an eye on. Lindsay, we will start with you.
So one thing I'm paying attention to is actually something you wrote about how the primary system in Indiana may be unconstitutional. And you sort of plant the seed that somebody should file a lawsuit. And so I'm very interested to see if the Libertarian Party of Indiana wakes up and decides to put the money where their mouth is and go ahead and challenge this, because I think they have a really good shot at winning.
It probably won't be the Libertarian Party, but you're on closer track than you think. Mr. Berman.
Just to put a bow on the gambling debate, I would expect that if a casino bill reaches Governor Holcomb, he'll sign it, which isn't much of a prediction, but this is a sea change. He is the first governor who has not been openly skeptical to hostile to the expansion of gambling, and that is something.
Jen?
Well, can I pick a none of the above? And,
Sure.
And I'll just say, I think the bias crimes bill is still one of the more interesting things that's happening during this session, and is very unpredictable.
And I will piggyback on that. I would not be surprised if the Senate moves a bias crime, but it does not have an enumerated list. It's just sort of that very generic, if you go after somebody for an immutable characteristic, you get the enhanced penalty. That's what I'm seeing right now. Our guests today have been political commentator Lindsay Marie, Eric Berman, 93 WIBC Network Indiana, Jennifer Hallowell, political commentator. Jennifer, thank you very much for coming. Good to have you anytime. From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, thank you for joining us. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.